I've got this mobile dimension bandsaw mill here I've had for I don't know how many years, quite a while now, and I've milled up a lot of lumber with it. Almost everything here on the property has been built with lumber milled on that, or salvaged lumber, or lumber built with the chainsaw mill, but most of it was lumber milled on that. All of the hangar over there was all built with lumber that came right off the sawmill. Well, a few years ago I got a deal on a mobile dimension sawmill. Now it's a sawmill, it's a circle sawmill. It has a large main blade on it. I think it's about 28 inches or 30 inches in diameter, and two edger blades on it, and it has a truss type track that you can assemble, make it virtually any length, and it's powered with a Volkswagen engine. I started working on the engine. The engine didn't need any work on it, but a lot of the peripheral stuff there, the flywheel housing or that housing there over the fan shroud and the battery box and a bunch of other parts on it were pretty rusty. Well, I cleaned all those up, and then something else came up, and I never have got back to that. Now, my idea with this circle saw mill was that I could cut cants with it and then put the cants on the bandsaw mill and mill them up there, because the bandsaw mill only has less than 1/8 of an inch of kerf, and the circle saw mill has over 1/4 of an inch of kerf on it. So there's a lot less wood wasted with the bandsaw mill than there is with the circle saw mill. The problem is this mill will only cut a 6x12. You can do some jockeying around with it and stuff and get it to cut a 12x12, but it's not that easy to do. You have to make a cut one way and then take the whole track off and turn it around and run it down the other side of the log, and a whole bunch of stuff like that really doesn't make it worthwhile to do. And the bandsaw mill, I can cut 12x12s on it, or 16x16s, or I've cut stuff that was 24 inches. It's about the limit that it can cut on that. Anyway, it'll cut a bigger cant than this will, but some of the logs that I have are too big to put on the bandsaw mill. The ones that I got last winter are 40 inches in diameter, and then I have some that are bigger than that here that I got a few years ago. I could rip them down with a chainsaw and then put them on the bandsaw mill, but I can just as easily put them on this circle saw mill. So I decided to get it out and clean this engine up and get it going. So the first thing I want to do is take that engine off of that. I've just got it sitting on one of those Black & Decker handy stands. I used to be able to pick that thing up and move it around, but in the years sitting there, it's gotten a lot heavier than it used to be. I can't hardly move it anymore. So I thought I'd take it off of that stand and put it over here on this engine stand. I had this engine stand most recently set up for my airplane engine on it, and now I've got the airplane engine on the airplane, so I don't need the stand anymore. So I'll see if I can't rig something up to mount that Volkswagen engine up on this. So that's the project now for the next day or two, is to do that. I can't just mount it up like the bolts on a regular engine back on the bell housing mount or anything like that, because it looks like that thing sits on kind of a cradle there. So I'm going to have to make some kind of a cradle for it and figure it out how to do that. First thing I'm going to do, I think, is clean it off. It's gotten pretty dirty over the years. Once I get it mounted on the engine stand, then I can finish working on it. I think I had everything pretty much all done that needed to be painted on it before. Well, I was just getting ready to try to set it up and get it started. And then once I get it started, I can pull the rest of that mill out of the hangar and get it set up and mill up those logs. I got that engine cleaned up a little better. I got some Zep scrubbing bubbles, foaming engine parts degreaser stuff in a can. Sprayed it down with that and then sprayed it down with some hot water, and I got most of the dirt and grease off of it. Come off pretty good like that. I found some scrap. I got a piece of, what is that? It's 4-inch, 3-inch angle iron, and I welded on to that box tube underneath there where that engine mount was for the airplane engine mount. And then I found a piece of 3/16 plate steel, just a scrap, rusty old piece of junk. Cleaned it up and welded it on there to stick out. And I got a piece of 1-inch box tubing and welded underneath it to kind of stiffen it up a little bit in the center. I was able to slide that engine over onto that, and it looks like it's going to hold it pretty good. I did have to cut off the upper portion of that mount that I had made up for the airplane engine mount so that that battery tray and stuff would slide on there far enough to get all the way on that plate that I welded in there. And then I've just got it held on with some C-clamps. I'm not going to be doing any twisting around to that or anything and turning it 180 degrees or upside down or inside out or anything. It's just going to sit there while I finish cleaning that up and try to get it ready to get it started. So working on that and getting it cleaned up, I did see a few pieces on there that I didn't get cleaned up before. I'm going to go ahead and take off, sandblast, and get them painted before I start putting that thing together to get it started. I'll get that workmate table out of the way, put it someplace where it's out from underneath the foot. Looking this thing over, I think I was going to get ready to put it back together when I quit working on it, but right now I think I'm going to do some more work on it. This throttle handle is getting pretty rusty. The paint's all peeled off of it, and all the connectors in here into the governor are all nasty looking. I don't know whether I'm going to take this intake tube off or not. Some of these linkage from the governor need to be cleaned up and redone. So we've got this linkage here that comes out of the throttle handle that goes over here and hooks into the governor, and then you've got another little linkage that goes down here underneath. And what is that? Is that just a pivot point there? Yeah, that's just a pivot point there underneath the governor, and it's got a little linkage here that goes to the arm on the governor, and a spring there, of course, and a little arm here. And then we've got this arm that goes between the governor and the alternator for tightening up the alternator or tightening up the belt for the governor belt. And there's a mount there for the alternator, and it's the governor mount there that's on. And we've got this linkage here hooks up to the governor, and then there's a link down there with a pin, cotter pin through it, that goes over to the carburetor. And then that just hooks up like that to the carburetor linkage. I'm going to go ahead and take more of this apart and clean this stuff up. Like this alternator bracket, it's got a little bit of rust on it, the paint's gone on it. I'm going to go ahead and sandblast it, paint it. So this flywheel and this big hub, pulley hub here, was pretty rusty, so I took it off. This is actually pretty well set up. It's got a taper on it, a tapered shaft on it on the flywheel, and you pull the bolts out that hold the hub in, stick them in the different holes, and use them for a press to press that off. So that come off there pretty good, even though it's been on there for a long time. And the same way with the hub, put the bolts in, and same bolts in through these three holes here, and they go all the way through and press against this bearing housing here and kind of loosen that up. I had to go ahead and use a puller on it to get it all the way off. That broke it loose anyway. So I can get this cleaned up in here in this whole flywheel housing, and I'm going to go ahead and sandblast these and paint them up, get them cleaned up. Here's my Mobile Dimension Volkswagen sawmill motor so far. I'm going to get into this a lot farther than I originally intended, which I guess is par for the course for me. I got the flywheel off and the big pulley off, and then I figured on taking off the rest of the steel parts. There's a mount here, or pad here, that the governor and starter and alternator mount to. As I started getting that, I could see I needed to go a little farther in that than I had originally intended, because this thing has got some white death on it. This crankcase is magnesium, and magnesium is pretty active, or pretty reactive, and what happens on here is that sawdust gets in on here and lays on this magnesium, and then the sawdust, of course, has the acids in it, and then the moisture, just the moisture in the air, causes it to react, and you get some pretty good corrosion on there. So I've got some pretty good corrosion on this crankcase on the outside of it. I'm pretty sure the inside of it is in good shape. The guy that I bought this from had just recently purchased a bigger engine, overhauled engine in the bigger engine. I don't know what that is, 1700 cc or whatever it is, but anyway, the big engine for this mill. And so the inside of it is in pretty good shape, and he'd filled it up, the crankcase completely up with oil, and the cylinders up with oil and everything, and so they're in pretty good shape internally. It's just that this place is like this pad and everything fits over here, and that sawdust gets in there on that, and you can't get it off. Even if you blow it off and stuff, it doesn't all get off. This thing has been undercover all the time I've had it, and it was undercover from the guy that I got it from, but even so, just the moisture in the air mixing with that sawdust and the acids in it laying on there caused that magnesium to react. So I've taken that pad off that I originally intended to, got it off, and I didn't intend to take the intake manifold off the carburetor. I wasn't going to take that off. But once I got into that, you could see how much corrosion there was on that. I went ahead and took it off. I've taken the oil cooler off. See, that was pretty crusty under there. That oil cooler actually stands proud of this pad that it mounts on, so sawdust and stuff gets underneath there between the oil cooler and this engine pad. I'm going to wind up taking this other stuff off too. I'm going to take off this, this is the oil filler, and then fuel pump. I don't know whether I'm going to take the distributor off or not. The sides of this don't look too bad, so I'm not going to take the cylinders off or anything. I'm just going to clean it up as best I can and then paint it with some corrosion resistant paint, some primer, zinc chromate primer or something like that. I got the top of that engine case cleaned up pretty good. That was kind of a chore. There was a lot of corrosion on the surface of it, which I got off with a wire brush on the drill motor, wire brushes on the drill motor. But I couldn't get into all these little corners and stuff here that were molded into this case halves. And then there was a whole bunch of really deep pits in there. Well, I dug out my die grinder, and I had some Scotch-Brite pads on there, some 2-inch pads, and I polished that up with that a little bit. And then I got some of these rotary burrs here to get in there, to get into clean up some of those tight spots and stuff, and get those pits. You have to get those pits down to the bottom of the pits, otherwise the corrosion will just come back on it, and just there, and it just stays there. Some of those pits are pretty deep, almost warrant taking a welder and filling those in. Well, anyway, I got it all cleaned up pretty much, as good as I'm going to. You can treat this pretty much the way you do aluminum. You could use Alumibrite to clean that up and into neutralizer to eat out the corrosion. And then I could allodyne this with allodyne just like I did aluminum, but if I was taking this apart and doing just that crankcase half and the parts of it separate with it disassembled, I'd probably go ahead and do that. But I'm just going to do what I did here. Now there's a little bit of corrosion on the sides of it, but it's not deep and not pitted like it was on the top. And in this flywheel flange housing here, all of that sawdust collects in here on all these pockets and stuff, and then just sits in there. Anyway, I'm ready to paint it. I washed it off with some Prep-Sol and got it cleaned up. It's all ready to be painted. I'm going to do the same thing and treat this just like I would aluminum. I've got the zinc phosphate primer. This comes from the marine supply store for outboard motors and lower units and stuff on outboard motors, and I use this on the airplane parts and stuff. So I'm going to put a coat of this on. I'll top coat that with Rust-Oleum. I don't know how that's going to work. I've had really good luck with the old Exo Rust years ago, putting on aluminum and protecting it. It's meant to be corrosion resistant on steel and kind of neutralize rust, but if you put it on clean aluminum, it etches right in there. And the big problem with that is getting it cleaned off when you go to clean it to repaint it. We'll see how the Rust-Oleum works on it. Of course, I'm going to have the zinc primer on there first, so we'll get that taken care of. Well, the primer is on there. That's what it is green. Sometimes it's yellow depending on the kind of primer and stuff, but that stuff is green. I'll let that dry, and then I'm going to spray that with the Rust-Oleum metallic color, a silver color or whatever, and that should protect that metal from the direct contact with the sawdust and stuff in there. The zinc primer hardened up on there a little bit, so I went ahead and put a coat of Rust-Oleum on there. Now that's going to do two things. One, hopefully that protects that some more from the corrosion, but it'll also brighten that up and make it a lot easier to see, and we'll be able to see the sawdust in there and stuff, and make it easier to wash off. It should also dry a little slicker than that corrosion that was on there, and that bare magnesium, that's everything kind of was sticky on it, so this hopefully will be a little bit slipperier. Sawdust and everything will wash off of there a little bit easier. That much is done. Now I got to clean up all the parts and pieces I took off and put those back on.